Okay, I'm going to make a start. So welcome to this webinar on our new approach to education quality assurance. My name's Jamie Hunt. I'm an education manager at HCPC, and I'm leading the pilot and implementation of this piece of work of our change programme to a new education quality assurance model. So welcome to colleagues who are education providers. I just wanted to, so kind of a bit of housekeeping, I suppose. This is a live event, so you can't kind of contribute in words, but you can ask questions through the Q&A box. So please, if you do have questions as we go, drop them in the Q&A box, and I've got a session at the end of the webinar. I'll probably talk for about half an hour, and then there'll be a Q&A session after that. So please drop your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll get to them, and I'll be able to answer those at the end of the session. I have some colleagues helping me out today, so I've got Steve and Becky from our comms team to be drawing together those questions so that I can answer them. So today I'll be talking you through our new education quality assurance model, and particularly trying to focus on the things that you as education providers, and you know, we sent this to senior people at education providers and quality assurance people. So we're hoping that you know, we've got the right people in the room really to start making some to start kind of making some internal change that we needed to engage with our model. By way of background, we're changing our approach to education quality assurance, and this follows a significant piece of work that we've been undertaking since 2009. Essentially, we identified some risks in our current quality assurance model. Particularly, it's not really changed in any significant way since we first introduced it. So that's kind of around 15 years ago now. But in that time, the education landscape's really significantly changed. Our kind of one-size-fits-all compliance-based, change-based approach now isn't really appropriate to the range of proposals that we are presented with, and the range of professions and the range of kind of different models of learning that we're presented with as well. As I've kind of noted, there's very much a focus on changing the existing model, and that doesn't really allow us to kind of really engage with what's happening through education provision at education providers, to consider where risks are and where we need to focus our attention. It focuses, the existing model focuses very much on what's different to last time you talked to us. And we also very much rely on what you tell us as education providers, you know, which obviously is an important part of quality assurance, and it has its place. But we also want to be able to rely more on other information, so data intelligence from other sectoral bodies that have an interest in education quality assurance. And lastly, there can be a really significant variation in our application of standards, and so the new model is certainly focused around trying to reduce that variation to ensure more consistency of outcomes and of the process and its application across education providers and within education providers as well. So my kind of top level key messages, our aim here is to position our education function to be flexible, intelligent and data led in our quality assurance of institutions and programmes. So the kind of top message here really is that our new quality assurance model is fundamentally different to our current approach. And that means that you will engage differently as education providers. You'll engage differently with our HCPC's education function. So the thing we will keep doing is continue to approve and monitor programmes that lead to registration, but we'll do that in a different way. So your engagement with us should be less burdensome, more meaningful, and in kind of several different ways, which I'll talk through this presentation. And another kind of top message really, and I suppose a call to action or a takeaway point for you, is that we're going to need some help from you over the next 6 months. And that's really to understand your provision, understand your HCPC approved provision and what that looks like, how that kind of links together, how it all works from a higher level than we kind of would have done normally. And then also we will need to kind of define how we need to define our working relationship. So we need to define how we'll work with you in the most efficient way, and who we'll work with at your institutions, those kinds of questions. So the benefits of our new approach, we intend to apply right touch regulation in the education quality assurance space. So what does right touch mean? That's essentially it's identifying the problem or the thing that we need to focus on before jumping to a solution. And what that allows us to do really is to be flexible in our application of our process, be flexible in the application of our standards. It allows us to meet your needs and the needs of our other stakeholders, and it allows us to really focus on the areas that need attention. So it moves away from one size fits all. It moves to a model that is focused around risk assessment and ensuring that we can undertake action where we need to in response to those risks. We want to ensure that our regulatory processes add value for you as providers. So we want to not just talk about what's going wrong, which is what we do at the moment. We report quite negatively. There's these conditions, there's these issues with your monitoring. And you need to fix them. We want to move away from that. We'll still need to do that, but we'll also identify and report on what's working really well, to kind of pick up high performing providers, and then apply a reduced level of scrutiny to those providers based on evidence and information and that risk assessment I've talked about. And a kind of a third benefit here is that we don't stand in the way, I suppose, of sectoral initiatives. So we'll still need to keep programmes, providers, new provision to regulatory standards. But we intend to move away from that one size fits all model to a much more kind of relationships based model. So, you know, if you are planning as an institution to do something new, you will be able to talk to us. We'll be able to define some assessment to kind of to apply a process flexibly, and then to undertake an assessment that adds value for you and for us as the regulator. And we hope that leads to a reduction in timescale for approving new programmes, especially new programmes that run at existing institutions when you are proposing a new programme through your existing provider. So how we've arrived at this point. So this has all been through our kind of governance structures. So our Education and Training Committee essentially reached a consensus with us to develop this model, develop a risk-based model which is data-informed and less administratively burdensome for us, but also for providers and our partners as well that we work with. We have then, in a co-production environment, worked with our stakeholders to develop the new QA model, and now we are undertaking a pilot. So we are refining that approach. We are learning a lot from our pilot activities, and our intention is that we work this process up, which we have been doing on an iterative basis through pilot cycles, with full implementation from the start of the next academic year, so from September 2021. The thing that I would also just note here is that unlike the previous process or our previous model, the new model, it's not intended that it all stands still. So it's intended that as there are changes, developments within sector, that those will be reflected through the new model. Things like new data sources, when those become available, we'll be able to bring them on stream. So we shouldn't need to do this kind of fundamental shift again in the future. It should be that we can kind of continually tweak, grow, evolve the model along with the kind of the needs of the sector and us as an organisation. Okay, how the new model looks and feels. So we'll still run an approval process. We will still assess institutions and new programmes to ensure they're properly organised to deliver education and training, and that learners at the end of those programmes are fit to practice. We'll still run monitoring. The monitoring process though will look very different to the existing monitoring, in that this will be periodic and proportionate engagement to understand the performance of you as an institution, and also the quality of your provision. So at the moment, our monitoring process is very focused around what's changed, mapping to a granular set of standards, and the intention is that, or not the intention, we are moving away from that as a monitoring model to something that's much more kind of tangible, meaningful, adds value, and gives us good information and allows you to reflect, to improve, to self-improve too. We'll also be undertaking engagement with providers where needed. So that's, if there is something that's happening that is impacting on provision, we'll be able to kind of, come in, talk to you, and work on kind of solutions to problems with you. Certainly the impact on the quality of your provision, and we'll be able to trigger that from a kind of a variety of sources. So if data shows us that something might be happening in an institution, or if you tell us that there's something significant that we need to kind of pick up and you'd like our help with, or if a member of the public came to us and told us something that we needed to then further investigate. That will be something that we'll be able to pick up through a really flexible process that is supportive for providers. So key features. We are kind of moving away, I suppose, from focusing at the program level. So our intention is that you'll see the word institution a lot through here. So we will kind of, as a first port of call, want to assess and understand how your institution works, rather than the kind of the granular program level. So there are many of our standards which are pitched at the institution level, our existing standards, and so we will do more. We'll make more of an explicit judgment about how those standards are met at an institution level. We will recognise institution-wide approaches to meeting standards, and what that means is we can just do that assessment once. So every time you propose a new program, instead of running through and assessing you against 50 odd standards, we'll be able to say, well, actually, this program slots it against in with existing provision. We don't need to review a lot of these standards in the kind of the detail that we would have done within the previous model, and that massively reduces burden for you as an education provider, especially when proposing new provision. We will also, in a similar vein, our quality assurance activity, we will try to focus at the institution level. So our monitoring will focus at an institution level, which will kind of reduce, I suppose, for large institutions, it will reduce us asking you for, say, 15, 20 different annual monitoring returns to one bigger, more substantial reflective portfolio, which covers all of your professions, but kind of particularly focuses on the areas that are go across all of your provision. So that's things like interprofessional education, it's things like the governance structures that underpin and management structures that underpin your programs and how they run, EDI, student support, a lot of these things will go across all of the programs that you run, and we will be able to consider the quality of those across your provision rather than at that individual program level. Now, and that massively should reduce the inconsistencies that might have been applied within the previous model, particularly around monitoring. We will also build good relationships with people within your institution. So we'll essentially be defining a new sort of link person role with HCPC. We'll be expecting and asking you to define who your kind of accountable person is at the institution level. We will then primarily deal with and talk to that person, and you'll also get a key contact with us as well, which will remain static. You won't need to just email the education@hcpc mailing address anymore. You'll get somebody's personal email address and a named person. And what we hope that does really is it just helps foster a relationship between the education provider and the HCPC, so that we can really build a relationship, ask you the right questions, really understand your provision, so that, you know, an executive member of my team's not coming cold to a situation that you're kind of expressing and that you want our help with, that we will be able to kind of understand that history, and already have established that working relationship with you, when we go through kind of further quality assurance activities. So as I've noted, the intention is that reduces duplication. It helps us be more consistent in our outcomes, but also crucially, it places more responsibility on you as a provider to manage your provision without regulatory sign-off. So something that you may have noticed about the last two slides is that there's no major change process anymore, and we won't be expecting education providers to engage with us on a granular, we've made these minor changes type kind of level anymore. What we would kind of ask you to do instead is changes through your portfolio submission through the monitoring process, which will come around on a periodic basis, but we're not going to need to sign off things anymore before you do them. So there's a consequence there that you'll need to pick up and think about internally. You know, if your internal quality assurance department wants a piece of paper from the HCPC saying these changes are fine, you're not going to get that anymore, and so you're going to need to think about how that will kind of impact on your own internal QA processes, and what you can do internally. Okay, flexibility of the approach. So applying right touch regulation in the education quality assurance space, kind of as I've noted already, our intention is here that we consider past interactions, we consider externally sourced data and intelligence, and then we focus our attention on the areas that require it. So that's you know, moving from that one size fits all approach to understanding the problem before jumping to the solution. And this, our regulator, the Professional Standards Authority, you know, wants us to regulate in a right touch way. So that's not, crucially, it's not light touch. It's a different kind of concept in that you say, what is it? What are the things that we need to concentrate on? What is the information telling us that we need, and the data and information and intelligence telling us that we need to focus on? And then how do we do that? How do we design a process to get to the bottom of issues in the most effective way? So that means that there's going to be more flexibility in the processes that we undertake and in the quality assurance activity that we undertake. So a consequence here, I suppose, to note is that when you ask us to approve a new programme, that's not going to hang off an approval visit anymore. So there will be circumstances where we will need to undertake physical or virtual approval events like we have done in the past, and like many other regulators and professional bodies do. But actually what we're finding is through our pilot activities is that we can be much kind of more focused in the quality assurance activities that we undertake, to reduce a load of burden again for the education provider. So instead of kind of saying, right, we're going to assume we're going to come to your you know, physically walk around your campus, talk to a load of people, we're going to say we're going to look at what the issues are, we're going to look at the areas and the themes that we need to explore, and then we're going to design our quality assurance activity based on those themes, those areas that we need to explore. And that might mean talking to people, it might mean physically visiting your site, it might mean answering some questions via email, it might mean nothing at all, depending on the kind of, you know, what's happening at your with the proposal. So data and intelligence is really fundamental, and it underpins the model really. So I've talked about us our approach to monitoring kind of being a self-reflective exercise. We'll also, our intention is that we will be able to for each provider decide the level of risk associated with that provider, which means that for some providers we'll need to monitor them quite frequently, and for others we'll be able to have longer gaps between monitoring cycles. So that linked to also linking in with the fact that we're not going to be asking you to submit major changes means that data and us regularly scrutinising external data sources becomes really crucial. Firstly, and obviously it allows us to kind of have some triangulation from independent, you know, an independent perspective about the programme or provider performance. but also it allows us to take some confidence that the decisions we've made are right. So, if we were to say we're not going to come back and monitor you for, 3 years, say, we're going to need to see through your performance data that there's been no sort of significant drop in performance, and if there has been, then we open up a channel of conversation with you. So it's a really kind of crucial underpinning part of it. It allows us to be confident in the decisions that we've made. It allows us to be confident that we've made the call right, really. So our intention is that we'd have regular data capture from HCPC. So we'll do that directly with HCPC. We'll also run our own new graduate survey, which will focus on preparation for practice, and we'll target people that have been in practice for a year there. So that they can really have some good insight into how their education and training has prepared them for their practice. So we'll use that data and information as part of the quality picture. And then our intention is that we'll kind of develop further data sources as we build further capacity. So those are our two priorities for delivering by kind of go live. But there are many other kind of rich sources of data where we can work with other organisations to share information. We'll also be undertaking, I suppose, a less tangible or a less quantifiable source of information is intelligence from other bodies. So certainly commissioning organisations and professional bodies, but other stakeholders too. And we've been working with some commissioning organisations and most of the professional bodies that are associated with our professions on how we really formalise data and information sharing protocols to make sure that we're sharing with them what is useful for them, but also they're sharing with us what is useful for us. And again, this is something that the provider, there's a reduction in burden here for the provider. So there will be things that you won't need to share with us because we'll have understood and gathered that information from elsewhere. So, for example, we're not going to ask you to provide a load of data that you would have given to HCPC because we're going to be able to get that directly from HCPC. So there's no kind of increase in burden there for you. And just a final mention here, actually. So we understand that some of this information can potentially add a lot of value for you as a provider. So, yes, I understand you'll get things like your NSS data back for those providers that are in HE. But having something like some access to the results out of a new graduate survey, so you can see how somebody felt at the point of graduation and felt when after their first year in practice. I think there's potentially there a lot of value added for you in terms of self-reflection, in terms of putting some improvements in place to address potentially some of those questions and some of those problems that maybe you didn't know about. And some of that, I'm sure that there will be, you'll have your own ways of gathering that kind of data and information, but there's certainly a rich source of data here that you will also be able to use as an education provider. So I've talked a bit about burden so far, and I've talked a bit about that reducing. I think there is a changing burden. So certainly there's a shifting focus here. So from that kind of from at the moment, we have really granular interaction. So yearly monitoring, provider triggered major change, and that's going to move to a self-reflective portfolio from the institution as a whole. Okay, so that's a more substantial piece of work than the returning an annual monitoring audit for a program within your institution and then doing that multiple times. It's a more substantial piece of work. It's a more kind of in-depth and thoughtful piece of work. But I suppose our intention is that adds a lot more value for you and for us in really kind of getting to the bottom of provider and program performance rather than compliance with a list of standards. So the crucial thing here is that the provider responsible person will oversee interactions with HCPC and will be the kind of the conduit, I suppose, for interactions with us. Now, how you then organise that person getting the information they need, how you put together your portfolio, all that sort of stuff internally is obviously up to you, whether there is kind of delegation there, whether there's a team that works on things and this person leads that team in terms of their interactions with HCPC. The portfolio time and effort, as I've said, really is going to take more time to put that together than the program level monitoring return. I think that's offset by not needing to engage on a continual basis. And there's an incentive here to perform well, really, for providers to perform well through the process. So, you know, if you perform well through the process, if we can be really confident that you're performing at a high level, that will then allow us to lengthen the amount of time between your submissions, reducing that burden further. So I think with all of that, I think that there are going to be some, well, there are some things that we're going to ask you over the next 6 months as well, some administrative things that we'll need to get in place so that we can understand how your institution works, we can understand who's the right people to talk to, and that, you know, there's some data cleanse activities there as well to make sure we've got all the right information and data. So there is going to be some work to do over the next 6 months, and you know, I think it's only fair that I tell you that that's going to be the case. But then after that, it will be a shifted burden. It will be sort of some effort required at to think about things in a different way, rather than that compliance-based administrative model. But crucially, the intention is, and some of the feedback that we've received is that there is a reduction overall in the burden that we kind of ask in terms of interactions with our process. And some of that's really neatly demonstrated in the fact that if you're already running provision, you come to us and say, I want to run a new program. We say, great, we're going to ask you to show us how you meet 20 standards, not 50. And so there's a huge reduction in burden around some of that kind of those kinds of things. Don't just take my word for this, though. So this is a view from the University of Essex, Chris Green, who's their Director of Education in the School of Health and Social Care. So the key points I pick out here, well, firstly, the portfolio-based submission has reduced administrative burden, and he's kind of drawn out that it was very useful that their internal record keeping was really well organised, so that they could easily pull things together for that portfolio submission. He said it was quite easy to construct it. And there's flexibility within that portfolio too. You know, we're not going to be asking everybody the same stuff. But actually, we will tailor what's in that portfolio to the situation. So, you know, an example would be, we're not going to be asking Scottish providers about degree apprenticeships in England because that's not relevant. And similarly, with kind of, you know, different types of models of education, and we'll be asking kind of particular and specific questions. He's also noted that this moves the process from a quality assurance type process meeting minimum standards to one which allows a provider a bit more space to kind of to tell us what's going really well. So instead of, you know, this thing's changed and we now meet the standard in this way, what this allows a provider to do is say, we're really proud of this initiative. It's really added a lot of value here, and we think our students are coming out as better, more well-rounded professionals at the end of our programs. So I think that's a really, this was one of the things that we were asked through our stakeholder work when we started to do, really. So we were asked to give space for providers to tell us what's working really well, and what they're kind of they're proud of, and what they want to you know, to have reflected in, say, their summary report at the end of a process. They also have just noted, or Chris has just noted, that relationship, it's nurtured a really good relationship between HCPC staff and the university staff. And then that's really kind of led to some mutual benefit when working together, really. So, you know, having that open lines of dialogue, really clear, you know, people that we're dealing with, everybody understands what they're doing. And then that can only be carried forward. So when we next work with Essex through whatever it might be, when we next work with you after kind of our initial interactions, we'll have that history there, and we'll be able to understand how we best work together. We want to establish a new relationship each time you engage with a regulator. So thanks to Chris for providing that. It was really useful. Okay, a couple more slides from me then now. This is just a bit of a timeline. So the thing that you need to do right now is to continue to engage. So this new model doesn't go live until September, and I still need to take this through our governance structure. So there is a decision point in early September where essentially our Education Training Committee will say, yes, you've done everything you need to, you can now put this in place. But you know, I think it's prudent to plan. So the thing that I'm asking you to do, and actually the thing that I should say is that so far when I've taken reports through to that committee, they're very happy with the progress. And so you know we're 2/3 of the way there to progressing in September. And I'd say that something pretty substantial would need to happen that would not allow us to move forward now at this stage. So we're asking you to continue to engage though till September, to consider what you will need to do internally to engage with our new model. So at this point, I think you probably need to start having a think about who your accountable people might be. I'm also going to talk in a second about program clusters, and I'll explain what I mean by that, but there's some work to do just thinking about essentially how you'll stitch some programs together and in your reporting to us. Yes, and consider who your accountable people might be. So from September, we'll ask you to kind of put some of that stuff in writing to us. And so we'll be working with you on establishing your program clusters. Now, program clusters is a term that we've arrived at. It's not perfect, but it's a term that we've arrived at, I think best describes what we mean. So essentially, this is a way that you would package programs together that meet standards in a consistent way. So we were kind of talking about the institution previously. That didn't quite work because there are some institutions that have a really wide range of HCPC approved programs that work in very different ways and don't really have much to do with each other. What it felt like there was kind of, you know, a set of programs that sits here under this school, a set of programs that sits here that's under this other school, and yet they might have some institution-wide policies, but actually they're managed quite differently. So what we would kind of do in that situation is we say you've got two program clusters, those interact with us, you know, on a more modular basis. So you know, we'd kind of, you know, take them through an assessment relatively separately, and while keeping an eye on where the similarities are. And you'd likely probably have kind of different accountable people for those as well. We'll get a load more information to you about how to define your program clusters. Clearly, there are some institutions where you'll just say, yep, great, we have one profession, so we're all one thing. And also some where there are many professions and they are just managed together. And we didn't want to define how this was going to look for every provider because every provider works differently in this kind of area. From September, the new approval process commences and major change in annual monitoring stop. So that would be the point at which those would stop and you need to, or you wouldn't need to interact with us anymore through those processes. But as I said, obviously wait for our comms before you kind of stop telling us things through major change. Late 21, our intention is that we would kind of engage with providers that will be taking through the monitoring portfolio submission in that academic year. And then from January 22, the model will be fully implemented. And after that point, probably around March time, we'd start asking for providers for their portfolio submissions. And our intention would be that we'd run kind of a risk-based exercise, and what we want to do is assess kind of the riskier institutions first, and the ones that we've identified as having, you know, potentially, I don't know, a larger number of students, say where there is lots of provision in a particular region. So it's kind of the ones where there might be kind of broader impact if we don't assess those sooner rather than later. But again, this will be a transparently undertaken exercise, and we'll be communicating at each step of the way with what's kind of happening. Okay, so I think, yes, we've hit the Q&A session now. So I'm just going to share my much for your time today. I hope that's been useful. My email address is there, so it's jamie.hunt@hcpc-uk.org. If you do have any questions or anything you want to tell me, then please email me. I'm more than happy to kind of you know, pick those up and come back to individuals, and that'd be really useful for me and hopefully for you. So also watch out for further comms. So we'll be doing kind of further comms as a real, you know, focus on our scale up and comms activities over the next few months, as you'd expect. So there's nothing really more from me today other than just say thank you very much, everybody, for your time, and I look forward to working with you all in the future.